Thank you very much for joining me, Dr. Tsepo. Thank you very much. Maybe I think on this note, let's really talk about where we are, the state of play at the moment, and just maybe personally, if both of you don't mind, just reflecting for me. And we'll extend the courtesy to you first, Prof, because you're in the States. How are you experiencing this COVID period? What has it been like, and what have you been reflecting on during this period?
Well, I became aware very acutely around January of this year and began, believe it or not, the last day of January, 29th of January, because I went into my emails to sort of see when did I start thinking about this virus as a very dangerous virus. And then I've dedicated 24/7 our entire scientific team to not only finding a vaccine, but also find a therapeutic. And I'm excited to say that that work is now paid off in the sense that we now have a vaccine that is in clinical trials in the United States. I think on reflection, it looks like everything I've done in my entire career so almost brought us to this point. I grew up in South Africa, trained at WITS, understood TB, the idea of infectious disease, pandemics, worried about that very, very much, HIV, and then turned my attention to cancer. So our entire scientific team has tried to figure out a way to address what we call things that will wipe out mankind. It's virus versus man. So we had not only manufacturing capabilities, we had technologies, which is the most modernized genomic sequencing technologies, supercomputing, and devoted then all those efforts going from zero to full GMP manufacture of a product all the way into phase 1 clinical trials, all from our internal resources. So it's been frightening because as I begin to understand this virus, it is here to stay and one of the most vicious viruses. It's also exhilarating because the science that we've put together has come to bear, and now we're on this, I think, trajectory to make a big difference. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I really want to make a difference from the point of view of South Africa.
Before I talk to Dr. Tsepo about how he's reflected during this period, just talk to me about that journey very, very quickly, because you're sitting in America at the moment, where America is really the epicenter. We've had over 200,000 deaths. There are still many issues that America is dealing with. And then obviously you've got this African body. You are fully aware of what's happening in Africa. Just quickly talk to me about wanting to then play a role in both of those spaces and realizing that you can.
And this is where you show how leadership matters, right? This virus, at least in America, we did not need to have 8 million infected and almost 250,000, now 225,000 deaths, if you in fact had leadership that actually took this seriously. So yes, I'm sitting in the country that is the richest country in the world, most developed country, but without the right leadership and without following science, you see what you see. I was so pleased because as it took on off here, I was watching what Africa was doing, specifically what South Africa was doing. And your leadership very quickly instituted social distancing, masking, and even the shutdowns. I think the greatest thing that I saw, which was the funniest thing to me, but was so telling, when I'm not sure whether your leadership said, we're locking you down and we're opening you up soon, but we're not. And the joke was, we didn't say when. So, and I think that has saved lives, tremendous lives. So, I'm happy as we go through this conversation to talk to you my journey from South Africa to this country and my hopeful return so I can help the country from where I was born.
Dr. Tsepo, just how do you, on that first question, reflect this period that we're going through at the moment? And if it's not too personal, how's it impacted on you?
So, no, thanks, Sam. And for me, really, as Prof Shiong says, we were fortunate that in March, relatively early in the pandemic for South Africa, we found ourselves at least responding in some way to the pandemic. As he says, the non-pharmaceutical measures were instituted, and shortly after there was a lockdown, which initially was supposed to be for 3 weeks. Of course, we stocked up a little bit on the essentials, but some essentials didn't quite last the 3 weeks. I think you know what I'm talking about. Yes, yes. But from a personal point of view, I mean, the virus has been quite disruptive, and it's been quite devastating to watch and listen to. I mean, you know, I can share personal experiences of people who were affected, who might have passed on. I can also, you know, reflect also on you know, some family members losing their jobs due to the economic meltdown that ensued. All of these things were really quite negative. But on the other hand, I found, I mean, you asked from a personal point of view how one could have reflected. And I have a young family, and finding ourselves together, you know, sharing 3 meals a day, every day. I mean, in the heat of the lockdown in level 5, every single day, I was there with my wife and 2 kids for all 3 meals, which was in some way, and funnily enough, beneficial to the family angle. Of course, the extended family and the social life was disrupted, but there were some benefits. And one thing that I found useful, I mean, we as scientists would interact in conferences, present where we can, travel far across to, you know, places like the US. What this pandemic did was, in some funny way, bring us closer together. I mean, we are here talking to Prof Patrick across in the US, and this has been quite prevalent. We find that communication has opened up due to the more ready interactions. We would have had to fly for some hours, you know, recover from jet lag, but here we are through a webinar process. We are able to talk in this way. And what happened then is that one was able to join various conferences much more readily, without too much travel, without too much disruption. So what I'm saying is that, you know, from our local perspective, the response was quick, and as Prof says, that saved lives. But the response was very disruptive and very sad in some instances, seeing people, you know, pass on. But there are some funny positives that one has experienced as a result, and part of that is my own immediate family life, and that's just some initial reflections.
Prof, there's a saying that you never waste a crisis. You never waste a crisis. How has your organization, yourself, your company, used this opportunity to really push ahead with some of those initiatives that you wanted to create? And what were some of them? I know you a little bit earlier, you talked about some of them, but will you expand for us a little bit more in terms of what the organization has done during this period?
In the last 5 years, our focus was to create a vaccine for cancer. Now that sounds strange, but we took the concept of genomics, where we could interrogate the cancer cell, pull out the sequence, and put it into a vaccine and inject that. And we've done this in 125 patients with the National Cancer Institute. So we were geared as a company to think about how we could develop this vaccine. In 2009, when H1N1 came about, our technology in 9 weeks was able to develop an H1N1 vaccine. I've spent our resources developing vaccines for third world countries because I knew pharmaceutical companies didn't see that as a business opportunity. Things like Lassa fever, chikungunya, Zika affects countries like Africa, India. So, you know, this country in America has given me so much. I got this amazing education in South Africa, came to Canada and came to this country, and was lucky enough to take our intellect and our intellectual knowledge and build a product called Abraxane, which was used for breast cancer, lung cancer. And on that basis, sold all that technology for the sole purpose of building what I consider maybe the National Institutes of Health in the private setting, but for doing real applications for real world. I'm very pragmatic. I'm a surgeon, and maybe I'm a South African, where we do things rather than talk about them. So I wanted to create a do tank rather than a think tank. And now we have close to 2,000 employees on 40 acres of facilities in Los Angeles, Chicago, Colorado, Seattle, spread across. And through this Zoom, which we are now doing, as was said, we have the capability of integrating much more easily without the travel. And literally, unfortunately, 24/7, we've been able to pull these people together, our people together. And what came out of nothing, from no knowledge of COVID, to, I think, the nation's, maybe the world's first, what they call T-cell COVID vaccine. And I'll share with you our non-human primate data, which we just received from BARDA, the Warp Speed funding, last week, which is very exciting data, which showed we wiped out or the replication of the virus after the virus challenge in these primates.
Oh, can you share more insight on that data with us, Prof?
Yeah, so we came to the conclusion very early on that our lens should be the lens of what we understand as cancer doctors, meaning the following. This virus gets into your body. It breaks through your blood vessels. It breaks into every organ, into your brain, your heart, your lungs, your kidneys. So it doesn't behave just like a normal virus, which is a respiratory virus. And guess what? That's how cancer behaves. And we realize that within cancer, antibodies, which is fine, don't really have a long-lasting effect. It is T cells that kill. The way to think about this is, I play basketball. I'm also the owner of the Lakers. If somebody knows about the Lakers in South Africa, I'm sure you do. And sadly, Kobe Bryant passed away the very first week that I was working on COVID. So imagine now you had a guard like, or a center like Shaq, and he would block shots. That's what antibodies do. But blocking shots is not what you need to win the game. You need something like Kobe, an offense. So T cells are like Kobe, they killer T cells. So you need to play both defense, i.e. antibodies to block the shots, and offense to kill it, so wipe it out from your body. And everybody's focusing on antibodies. And everybody's focusing on this protein called S that creates antibodies. And I looked at this and I said, this is nuts. We need both S and another protein called N to create T cells. So we created a vaccine for both antibodies and T cell centric. And that looked very different to everybody. And, you know, difference creates concern because it's different. So it took the FDA a little while to get us through the hoops. But the good news is that BARDA said, no, we will fund you. And we will put this into our monkey experiments and take 10 animals, give them your vaccine, and after 57 days, challenge them with the COVID virus, which meant they gave them the virus into their lungs, deep into their lungs, and then see what happens. Well, we just got the results back. Within days, the viral load dropped to the point where within days, they couldn't see zero replication of the virus, both in the nose and the lungs. You can't imagine the screaming that went on with our scientists that we were right. And October the 13th, when the study challenge results came back, that exact day is the day the FDA gave us green light to go into phase 1 trials. And we are now in phase 1 trials. We injected the first 5 patients. By next week, we will have completed our first cohort. The following week after that, we will have established this dose, which we know already is safe. We've already given 125 patients. And I've been in conversations for the last 6 months with Glenda Gray, Helen Rees, Shabir Mahdi, Adam, to talk about how important it is for South Africa to lead the world, believe it or not, and Africa, to create an infrastructure where you could manufacture this technology and deliver it throughout South Africa and to Africa. I think Glenda and Helen was very surprised that I said, I, as a South African and American and a Chinese and am an apartheid survivor, am willing to come back to South Africa and transfer this technology into the country to give you capacity so that we as South Africans could lead the nation.
That is absolutely. I feel like I want to scream along with your doctors and your scientists. It sounds absolutely phenomenal. That's amazing work, Prof. Just bringing it maybe back here, because I know this is a conversation that we're having with two South Africans. One that, as you said, Prof, is now based in America, but the CSIR in its own right has also been working through this process. It's very difficult to follow that kind of announcement with a question.
Oh, yes.
Because you're still trying to process what that means for the world. But just talk to me, Dr. Tsepo, in terms of just kind of when you hear that kind of news, right, from Prof Soon, and you kind of see what you're doing here, just kind of what is your first reaction?
No, that's very big news, and Prof Soon's latest data there is really quite exciting.
And he's so calm about it. He
yes,
would have gone crazy as he made the statement, but he's so calm.
The joy of it is that also he's so close to our country, and he's very willing and able to help in bringing this technology to South Africa. And I liked his analogy that he made around the LA Lakers and Shaq being the antibody, and for our group in the biomanufacturing area of the CSIR, that's been a major focus, making antibodies against COVID. We selected a panel of different antibodies that some will tackle the virus, the S protein that Prof talked about, and then we also selected 3 other antibodies that from a distance might look like are not relevant to this, but when the COVID disease gets very, very severe, one of the things that happen is that you get this so-called cytokine storm effect, where the patient's immune system goes into overdrive, and in fact much of the damage is done in that phase of the disease. And so we also have, using our plant-based expression system, we're making antibodies that would tackle that cytokine storm. Some would bind to interleukin-6, Prof will know about this. Some will bind to other parts of the immune system to try and now suppress this cytokine storm. And as I listen to the development around the vaccine at NantWorks, I realized that these various initiatives that we have here locally and what Prof is doing in the US will be very complementary, in the sense that before the vaccine gets to operate, or for those people who have not been vaccinated, there's still need for treatment, and antibodies are a crucial part of that. On the other hand, we also, we've had a long running experience in making diagnostics, of course, because the CSIR in South Africa has very limited CGMP infrastructure for manufacturing human health regulated products. We've also tended to utilize our expression systems for making diagnostics, because the regulatory hurdle to get there and the type of manufacturing you need is slightly less burdensome. So one of the first things we did, and we got good support from the South African Medical Research Council for this. Prof mentioned Prof Glenda Gray, who's there. We got a good support to start developing diagnostics. One of the things that have happened globally is that the demand mainly for the RT-PCR based diagnostics for COVID was huge. And at times you saw in South Africa, the number of diagnostic tests being done was high. And for a week or so, it would lull and you'd get this low dip. And we wondered why. Actually, what happened is that the supply globally was constrained. And one of the things the Medical Research Council and the Department of Science and Technology asked us to do was to try and look at how we can then localize the production of these diagnostic kits. And that's one thing that we've worked quite rapidly with a small company that was actually a spin-out of work that we did in our group to try and now develop these RT-based PCR diagnostics for COVID. And that work is now reaching the regulator. We are hoping that we will be able to assist the small company to launch very, very soon. So just to summarize our own efforts, there are groups in the CSIR who are also looking at vaccine. We also have a major intention to assist in localization of such vaccines coming from companies like Prof in the US. But we're also looking at diagnostics on the one hand, and also antibody-based therapeutics as another strategy that complements what Prof Soon-Shiong has talked about.
I've got to ask a follow-on question, and I'm going to throw it to Dr. Tsepo before I come to you, Prof. The environment, South Africa and America, is very different. Here you've got a president who, in many ways, listens to the scientists. In America, you've got a president who is pro-vaccine but anti-scientists. Just talk to me about that dynamic, because Prof did talk about the ability to bring that to South Africa, to roll it out through South Africa into the African continent.
So I mean, we are delighted to find that the national government has been very supportive, and we realize that the president has listened quite closely to scientists. Of course, there are different voices among the scientists, and that's inevitable. But because of that closeness to science, we see that the non-pharmaceutical strategies, masks, social distancing, were made quite prominent in what we're supposed to do as a country, and people really did comply very, very well in the main earlier levels of the lockdown. And at the same time, also South Africa moved very, very fast. There was a lot of talk around the whole issue of testing vaccines in Africa. Some people misunderstood and were saying, "Oh no, wait, why are we made guinea pigs?" But actually, it's very, very important that we, as South Africa, we participate in these vaccine tests. And very early in the process, I mean, we know of vaccines from the UK and Oxford and others that are currently now ongoing clinical trials in South Africa. And we're hoping to see that then the NantWorks initiative also comes very soon to that level, and our local landscape is really open to this. And even as I talk to friends and family, I find that our willingness and openness, maybe it's experience of other infectious diseases in the country, our willingness and openness to take vaccines, at least from a distance, seems more willing than say the US. It's funny, you're talking about a president who says they want vaccines but doesn't necessarily listen to other strategies. The politicization of this issue is really heartbreaking. But fortunately, in our environment, it seems that we are in a better position where the government has been really willing to listen. There are different voices, but overall, I think we've done very, very well.
Prof Soon, you're in an interesting environment, even though you've got an South African lens, but you're dealing with a president who loves the idea of vaccines, have made tons of promises, and I'm talking about Donald Trump. You can't mistake that for anybody. But he's anti-scientist, and even he's head of infectious disease. In actual fact, is not an expert. He's publicly been quite vocal against Dr. Anthony Fauci.
I think this is why once the geopolitics took over vaccinology, which is really where we really are all in this together. You get infected in Africa, or India, it affects America, and America infection affects anybody else. My great concern once I started seeing these geopolitics and the nationalization of vaccines was countries like ours, yourselves, and I say ours in the sense that I feel South African, so I'm speaking to my hometown, so I mean that, would be utilized, so to speak, in the clinical trials, and then when the vaccine is available, not have access, because the way it's going on now between CEPI, Gavi, and government agencies, they're buying pre-contracts, and the limitations of the manufacturer is very, very real. So, and then the cold chain of minus 80 degrees centigrade. These are nuances that I'm so pleased that your president understands and listens to the scientists, because only scientists will understand these, people like Helen Rees and Shabir Mahdi and the group in Cape Town. So I have had these conversations in great depth, almost on a weekly basis, with the leadership in South Africa. what is good to know for me is that the country understood that, wait a minute, you'll be doing these trials, the vaccines, if they in fact are safe and effective, would they then be made available to the population at large and affordable and supplied? And could it actually go into places where there's no refrigerators? I looked at this and said, the way for me to address this, if indeed we have a vaccine, but for a responsible perspective, I need, just like when I did my training in Janswick General, to get into Janswick General Hospital, by the way, as the first Chinese in the history of South Africa during the phase of apartheid, to fight to get to be an intern at Janswick General Hospital. You need to be better than the best just to be equal. And so we took this approach that in order for us to demonstrate we better than the best or just to be equal, I would not move until we got FDA clearance and get through. Only 42 vaccines are in clinical trials, very few through the level of FDA. We one of them. But once I did that, I would then come to South Africa and say, look, we have an opportunity to create GMP manufacturing capability, very much like Dr. Tsekoa has been saying, that we need to create a platform that goes from prevention, i.e. vaccine, to treatment, very much like he's talking about, Dr. Tsekoa is talking about the antibodies, if and when the patients go to the hospital, to diagnostics. At NantWorks, we happen to have built that entire platform. And not only I'm willing I'm anxious to transfer that technology into a South African-owned entity so that we could train the workforce and create an infrastructure that is of FDA standards and create capacity in the country, not only to serve the country, but to lead Africa. So that is my goal over the next 3 to 5 years, but every day matters now. And so that's why I'm literally in constant communication with your ministers even. I spoke at length with Ibrahim Patel, and hopefully we'll get access to speak to the president so that we can actually execute this very rapidly. You need to understand that unfortunately, this vaccine product has taken on a geopolitical stance that affects nations. And South Africa stands at a flexion point where you now have enough workforce at a level of education that with your color, was never given the chance to get to even into medical schools. I just listened this morning to Shabir Ahmadi's talk that when I was in medical school in South Africa, there were 3 of us. It was a quota. Now 60% of color, which then says we have an opportunity to now take this younger workforce and create a capacity and leapfrog the world with technologies that are here, but take the nimbleness and the desire of South Africans to do things as opposed to talk about them and accomplish. So my goal is to convince your leadership, your country, our country, that the moment of flexion point, COVID, ironically, has created this opportunity.
Prof. Soon, a follow-up question. The journalist in me wants to know, you are currently having conversations with Minister Ibrahim Patel, and you eventually hope to then have a chat to the president. What is the status of that conversation in terms of, have you been making inroads? Do you see it happening within that 3 to 5 years? And then are you also saying that South Africa has the capability to really have those pharmaceutical breakthroughs that we see in the rest of the world?
I'm in constant conversations with Glenda Gray, Helen Rees, Shabir Ahmadi, Adam, the Chancellor at Wits, Graham Menkes, Adam Ward at University of Cape Town. The idea would be, no, I've not yet had the privilege of speaking to the president. But the idea would be to move very fast, very rapidly, and look at the resources. When I say resources, the human capital resources. So this is not monetary resources. It's human capital resources to bring our team. So many years ago, in 2010, I ran a company called American Pharmaceutical Partners and Abraxane Bioscience. We were responsible for manufacturing 300 million doses of injectables in the United States. My vision then was to transfer all of that technology into South Africa so you could manufacture your own generic injectables, not buy them, manufacture them at a standard of FDA. Unfortunately, I could not get enough philanthropists to stand with me to come into South Africa and create what we call capacity. My view is you need to build capacity. I said we need to help Africa fish, not give them the fish, teach them to fish. But teach them to fish at the highest standards. And this is what I think we can now do. So when I say every day matters, I've been in discussions with the leadership now for 4 months. We applied to the GMO so we could send you our master viral bank so that you have the master cell bank in your hands. I think the leadership was surprised that we were the only pharmaceutical company willing to transfer this technology, because it's not about building a pharmaceutical company, it's about changing a nation. So the answer is yes, I'm anxious to move fast. Every day matters. And we could run a trial in South Africa for South Africans, specifically for South Africans, a phase 3 trial limited to South Africans so that we understand the demographics of white, colored, Chinese, Black, because there are different genetic sequences that have maybe different responses. We don't know that. We don't understand this virus enough yet, but we could at least develop a trial specific for South Africans. If that trial was successful for South Africans then could lead Africa. And I was talking to Helen Rees about a live in which it was the African leadership of vaccines. So these are visions that I have at a very high level. We have all the technology. I can thankfully control 100% this technology. I require nobody's permission from my side. And I'm also happy to say I'm doing the same thing in our country, where I'm working with the Navajo Nation and the Apaches. The Apaches have given me the honor of creating for me as an honorary Apache on their council, the Apache Leadership Council. I think it's an evidence of trust that the motivation is to help the underserved. And I think South Africa has taught me that. We've been underserved since I was born. And I left the country when I was 23, after I finished my internship at Janswick General Hospital, went to the TB clinics in East London and realized I was helping nobody, because I was injecting these kids with streptomycin without any x-rays, without anything. And I said, I'm not helping them. I'm going to leave and come back and fix things. I thought it would take me 5 years to leave and come back and fix things. It's now 20 or 30 years, but I've got to keep that promise to myself.
Just to bring it back to Dr. Tsepo, in terms of just what Prof Soon was talking about human capacity, it's not a financial issue. South Africa's role and the ability to play a major role within the pharmaceutical industry. Can we do it, number one? And I mean, from a CSIR perspective, it is an award-winning organization. Is there capacity?
This is a very important question, and I was listening carefully to Prof Shiong, and his willingness to transfer technology, his willingness to partner with South Africa and to assist in the long term and more immediately now for the COVID pandemic is really heartwarming. And I can share with you that actually I was reminding Prof that I was part of a meeting with his team and two of our executives here at the CSIR, where there's a whole network of South African organizations that might be able to assist in landing technologies for this particular instance and from NantWorks. And we are hoping at the CSIR that we will be part of that team that does this. And one of the things we see is that we have this formidable company with formidable leadership that has links to our country, and we see an opportunity there that things can really happen. Things can happen very, very fast. On the other hand, we've started in many ways to build capacity locally, and the CSR sees themselves as we see ourselves as a major part of the R&D landscape. In doing so, we are able to make, like I said, monoclonal antibodies, enzymes, and other biologics. But a major main gap that I see in the national landscape is infrastructure that resembles what Prof was talking about, where we have CGMP manufacturing capability. Just to make clinical batches of some of the molecules that we've worked with. We've had to travel across. I spent weeks at one point in the US in Kentucky to make plant-based antibodies for rabies. And that's where we learned some of our approaches. We are seeing an opportunity now with CHO cell-based production. At NantWorks, we are seeing opportunities for gaining access to some of these more cold chain, biologics that do not require the cold chain as an opportunity. So the point I'm making is that we do play at a credible level at the CSIR and in South Africa. I mean, there are other institutions that actually manufacture. The BioVac Institute. There are universities that do R&D. We do R&D and with a focus to supporting industry. But truly speaking, we do see gaps. Recently and quite fortunately, we've had some support from National Treasury. By the way, it's an exciting time for us because we've had a good injection of support from government to say, well, you are saying that there's this gap in CGMP manufacture. What can you do to start to making steps towards, bringing this capacity to South Africa? And with the support, we're just starting now to look at how we would design a very small scale, capability at the CSIR, but that would still enable us to make biologics of the right grade for use in humans. So for example, we would have a facility that could manufacture IND enabling trials, that could manufacture small batches for phase 1. I see now that, if we can speed up our conversations with Prof and NantWorks, that actually there could be a very critical part of that. He's talking at the highest level in the country. We've spoken to his team, but I think if we ramp up those conversations to see then how they can also influence how we begin to design and plan ahead, given the small support we have, how can we make that a bigger initiative? How can we match that and match it to ongoing needs around COVID, around particular products? Because of course, if you're wanting to look at CGMP manufacture, it might be good to align it to unit operations that are specific for a particular product. As the CSR, we want to have a capability that is open for many different opportunities. But there's an opportunity here that I think we should really jump on. We with a company of the stature that we are talking to here now, I think we would be able to escalate our capability to a different level in terms of human capacity, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the partnerships that would bring and localize these technologies. I see the CSR playing a bigger role there.
And of course, Dr. Tsepo, when you're having this kind of conversations, and as Prof Soon has been talking about fast tracking and making sure that we are actually almost in many ways quite aggressive to the timeline, that it then becomes accessible to the actual people that it could benefit.
Absolutely. In this particular case, we need to move fast. We can see the devastating effect the particular pandemic has had on the economy, on livelihoods, on lives. We can't sustain the current status quo for very, very long. So you're right. We have to move very, very fast. We have to respond as quickly as possible. And the way to do that, from our context, and the way to move at speed is to partner across global borders, is to partner with South Africans who are elsewhere, who have done very, very well and are willing and able to do this. And And with COVID, if we are to make impact, if we are to see a reversal of the pandemic, we must make sure that the vaccines, the biopharmaceuticals, the top end, previously inaccessible, expensive biopharmaceuticals must reach everyone. Because to get herd immunity, obviously the vaccine must be administered at all levels of society. And as I was listening to Prof, he's right. COVID can make many things happen. We are responding to one particular small virus, but actually it can open up opportunities that will enhance availability and access to these high-end drugs to people who never before would wish for them. I mean, I don't know if you know the scenario currently in our healthcare system. There's this two-tier healthcare system where the bulk of the budget goes to people like you and I who have medical aids. The ratios are very, very, very stark. The public sector, the funding and the money invested in the public health service in Tembisa Hospital, in local clinics, is 20% of the spend roughly, and yet it supports more than 80% of the population. You drill that down to administration and prescription of these high-end biopharmaceuticals, you realize that it's almost non-existent, and yet these are highly potent, very specific, very safe, generally modern drugs that would help with healthcare. Insulin is an example, monoclonals are examples, and even vaccine for flu, for seasonal influenza. There's a huge disparity between what you see in public settings versus the private sector. The COVID scenario, if, for example, we were to install a CGMP manufacturing capability in South Africa, you can see a potential where actually the same capability can be then utilized for bringing these other molecules for other indications beyond COVID. And so it's very exciting times, really.
Prof, just to get your reaction, and I think that is such a point for me, that even though we are focused on COVID, to Dr. Tsepo's point, is that in actual fact, COVID in many ways now is the gateway to deal with so many other things. Do you agree that you could use this as a starting point to fast track some of the other issues that has been caught up in red tape?
I completely agree. In fact, I'm very inspired by Dr. Tsekoa in the CSIR, because in fact, I didn't even know until we had these conversations a week ago, that CSIR was building this infrastructural capacity for these monoclonal antibodies. That is the seed. That is such a valuable seed. I'm happy, Sam, to show you some pictures of our 2,000-liter tanks, where we're building capacity for 100 million doses in the United States. There's no reason why not taking a CSIR seed and generating them from that literally within 6 months, and I'm not saying less than that, we could, with the right leadership and aggressive timelines, bring that particular know-how into South Africa. And that know-how then transcends just COVID, because out of these molecules, you would have treatments for cancer, you would have treatments for TB, you would have treatments for Zika, chikungunya, Lassa fever, malaria. These are the things that affect Africa in a very different way. There's a thing called cervical cancer, which is only in the underdeveloped countries. We don't do much cervical cancer research in the United States, but the treatment here would be able to be not only useful. When I left South Africa as finished my medical school training, it was very clear that the things that were affecting South Africa was heart disease, hypertension, kwashiorkor, TB. That hasn't changed very much, but what has changed is the infectious disease and what I call non-infectious disease, which is cancer. So between cancer, TB, HIV, influenza even, what people don't realize is that the treatments today, and as Dr. Tsekoa has eloquently shared, they are potent, what we call cytokines or antibodies that we can now manufacture in test tubes that your body produces, but we can manufacture them and then distribute them to even these clinics. So this is where the opportunity really exists, that if the leadership takes hold of this one opportunity now and breaks through the red tape, we are still going through with SAFRA as we speak, putting our protocol, and we're doing this with Kalicha, believe it or not, in University of Cape Town, to do the trial. But I did not want to start these trials until we had FDA approval. So nobody could ever accuse us of us taking advantage of the Apaches or South Africa. We are now at the highest level, on the highest level of the highest playing field, but that doesn't mean we should stay there. We should actually now distribute that knowledge beyond ourselves here in this country. But I couldn't agree more that taking the advantage of COVID and the need for that kind of speed, that need for that kind of speed is no different from what you need to do to treat drug-resistant TB, no different what you need to do to treat HIV, no different what you need to treat pancreatic cancer, breast cancer, cervical cancer in South Africa. It turns out that the technology that we are developing covers, in a global sense, these opportunities.
Another thing that Dr. Tsepo mentioned that really jumped out at me was the price point and accessibility, and making sure that these things are available to the public. Just, Prof, how do you reflect on the fact that these high-end drugs are incredibly expensive to administer? And rightfully, as Dr. Tsepo said, that you have the largest part of the population that does not have access to it for many reasons, but pricing structure is one of them, and accessibility is another.
That's the reason why I think local manufacture, reduction of cost, reduction of transport, the opportunity to create what we call breaking the cold chain. So we are developing capsules, oral capsules, believe it or not. The trial I told you about in the non-human primates, in the monkeys, we not only gave them one version of injections, we gave them another version of oral capsules. And what was exciting, these oral capsules, which are at room temperature, could then be popped by anybody and taken. And these oral capsules worked in these monkeys to exactly do the same thing. It actually wiped out the viral load and viral replication within days. So these are breakthroughs that are here now. It is really opportune for us to utilize these breakthroughs for the general population at large. So that's why this is so encouraging. I think science has evolved to the point that political organizations and leaderships need to recognize that. And that's why I was so heartened when you said your president recognizes science rather than non-science.
Dr. Tsepo, we're coming towards the end of this conversation, but I feel I have to talk about 4IR, and I have to talk about convergence and digital integration. It's a question I'll throw at Prof as well. But just kind of talk to me in terms of what the most important developments will be in that space and the impact that it will make on pharmaceutical production.
So this is it's a very topical question, as you know, and we've seen the media jump on the whole question of 4IR. And in my space, my focus is in biomanufacturing, is in making biologics using recombinant systems. We have people working rotational shifts in the R&D facility we have, for example. Why can't we have a scenario where, in actual fact, we remove those shifts? We have automated processes. We have remote control of our facility in some way. I know that NantWorks has a whole vast network of other companies that I believe can put all the cogs, into this space, but then you come to the area of, in CGMP manufacturing, documentation and recording of your processes. For example, production batch records are done on paper much of the time. How can we bring sensors into this? How can we bring sensors that link to, databases that then record and take all the data in a much more automated, aggressive way. I mean, I'm just bringing thoughts that are things that, as we also think about how we might implement our own CGMP infrastructure, how can we then start to bring in things that will leapfrog South Africa to the next level? If we implement what is the status quo yesterday, we are not investing in the future. If we start to look at then how best to leapfrog our own circumstance, and we have the opportunity now to install new capability. If we can modernize that capability to with a forward-looking future view, introducing these generally hyped up 4IR solutions, we can really do well. Then we might be able to mitigate the whole issue of cost of production. We might be able to do much better in broadening access. I really want to hear from Prof on this one, because I think it's an area that he will have much more depth. Yeah.
Prof, same question to you in terms of 4IR and the role that it can play around mitigating that cost, but also production, and just in relation to healthcare. What does 4IR mean to you?
Let me just give you, it may be a little overwhelming, but let me give you a big overview of the mission of NantWorks. When I started NantWorks 10 years ago, I had this wonderful privilege and opportunity to take all the resources I had, sold all my companies, and sat down and said, we have an opportunity to address things that will wipe out mankind. Climate change is one of them, poverty, food, and healthcare. So when looking at climate change and healthcare, the thing that converged for me was the whole concept of artificial intelligence. So there's this thing called the National Lambda Rail, which is the fiber infrastructure that actually went from Bern all the way to the United States to find God's particle. I ran that for 4 years. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what I took over. I was, as part of my medical, one assistant professor at UCLA, I became part-time a NASA scientist. And I put things on the space shuttle. And there I learned about the Mars rover and a thing called machine vision. It became very clear to me early on in my career that if we could grab hold of the concept of what I call augmented intelligence, people call artificial intelligence, by linking supercomputers together and have a thing called machine learning. So I took the National Lambda Rail and I built 300,000 fiber miles across the United States, all the way to London and all the way to Tokyo, and put my data centers on it. These are our supercomputers that are doing what we call machine learning and going through the genomic sequences of cancer patients and predicting what treatment they should have. And that's a company I own called Nant Health. My vision there was to have every human being as an astronaut. Now we can do it. You have a Fitbit, so every human being could be an astronaut, so we could have what we call a mission control center. We started running that experiment. So that is part within the health profile. But as I ran these data centers, I realized the energy requirements was enormous. So I started looking at how could we generate energy from the sun? And then I watched as Cape Town ran dry from water. So I funded a company called Heliogen. You should look it up, HELIOGEN. That was able to take mirrors and focus them through machine vision to a single spot and generate 2,000 degrees centigrade, and then convert water out of the atmosphere. I funded another company called Zero Mass Water, which is now putting water, these little solar panels, but generating water for the Navajo Nation. Now, these sounds like incredible ideas, but we put a pilot in Pasadena, and we're able to break the world's record by focusing the sun and generating 2,000 degrees centigrade. Well, what could that do? Well, that could heat materials. And then I started looking what is generating CO2 in the planet, and cement. Cement is one of the largest generators of CO2. And where does cement come from? It comes from quarries of the mines, and you're destroying the land. So we discovered that what it needed was a thing called calcium carbonate. There was a source of calcium carbonate replenishable in the ocean. So we've now pulled out tons and tons of that material from the ocean, which is completely renewable. I put it into Alabama in a port soon in Savannah. And we're using that now as a source maybe to make cement, and also, believe it or not, as a source to actually generate bioplastics, which are completely compostable. So we've made now the first bioplastic straws. And so if you look at these, what's common along this idea? It's a common denominator to take technology that's here, and as I said from the outset, as a South African, to quietly do as opposed to talk about it, and break it now into scalable products that could change the country and ultimately, therefore, have an impact on the world. So separate from these discussions on COVID, I'm in discussions to bring to Arizona, where we have an amazing amount of sun, and to the Navajo Nation and to the Apaches, the ability to take the water from the ocean, from the lakes and from the rivers, clean it, and actually generate through the heat, steam, which then generates electricity. So these are novel things that are not novel. What the world hasn't recognized, we now have all the tools. What you need is leadership and understanding and execution of these big projects. And that's what gives me excitement. That's what sort of keeps me awake every day to say, hopefully in my lifetime and for our children, we can generate a better world using these pieces of technology. And then finally, my fun thing to do, I wanted to get around when I saw this thing called Bird and Lift, which is these little scooters. And I said, I'm going to build a scooter that can go 30 miles an hour all day, just on electric. And I finally have my first scooter that can go at 30 miles an hour, fully electric. And I have my first two, and that's another company called Nant Mobility, or Stator, Stator. These are companies I own. Some of them are quasi hobbies, but all of them I think could have an impact. And that's what I believe. I think about the convergence of technology, using the sun, using nature, using the water, cleaning the air, and informing healthcare.
Dr. Tsepo, I don't know when Prof has time to play basketball, but I don't know when he has time to play it. But anyway,
He bought the team.
he bought the team. Okay, final question to both of you, and I'll give last word to you, Prof. Soon, but I'll start with you, Dr. Tsepo. Just talk to me about what would you say has been the most profound learning from a socioeconomic or related perspective? Just obviously not related to medical technology, but just some insight.
Yeah, well, I mean, you hear the word profound and you get concerned that you might not pitch it at the right level. But really, what the pandemic has made me realize is that people are so diverse. We're very much the same, but also very different. I've watched and I've listened to how, the one person here feels lost being stuck in their home, and while others are thriving. You understand? You see the response of one president versus another, two different tangents, but actually in that diversity, I think that there's a common humanness that we need to try and harness as a result of this whole pandemic. We all want to get out of a situation that restricts us. We even if you're complying to the various lockdown measures, doesn't mean necessarily that you're particularly happy about it. So the one common thing is that all of us would want to see the pandemic resolved. We can politicize it, we can underplay it, we can do whatever, but the one common element I find is that we are all anxious and we all want to see this thing and come to an end.
Prof. Soon, for you?
Well, the profound learning is actually not that profound, in the sense that COVID has unmasked these inequalities, completely unmasked these inequalities. If you look at the inequalities of the healthcare system in our country, and I'm sure around the world, those underserved, underrepresented people are the ones that are dying. It's also unmasked this thing about education and mental health. So I think we also understand, maybe some countries better than others, that we're all in this together, this virus against man. So one of the profound learnings, and I've actually learned in Frank from my daughter, who spent time in South Africa with Equal Education, a Princeton Fellow, and in Kalicha, believe it or not, and is now at Oxford and developing a program in Compton called the Compton Pledge for Universal Guaranteed Income, which I think, in fact, she's convinced me, is not just a safety net, is a mission that we should be able to take that actually would be able to help people who are desperate. So what has happened with regard to COVID, the people who really provide all the work and are poor are not only suffering the worst. And so it's unmasked this unequal healthcare system, unequal education, the issues with mental health. And what's profound for me is solutions at least now being explored because of COVID. So COVID has some blessings, and maybe it's a message to all of us as a humanity that there are solutions if we just get beyond ourselves and just look at humanity and what I call the common good for all. And that's the profound learning that I hope we can all take from this.
Professor, thank you very much for your time. Professor Soon-Shiong and Dr. Tsepo Tsekoa, thank you very much for your time. And it's been super insightful having a conversation to both of you.